So I don't know if you know this or not, but shoe size runs in the family. And I don't really have any science necessarily to back it up or anything, but I know everything that I need to know based on this fact due to experience. You see, my grandfather wore a size 14 shoe since the time that he was a young man. And I'm sure that he was taller in his earlier days, but even as he's aged, he still casts a very, very long shadow, metaphorically and literally, over our family. He's a good man, a man who has never met a stranger and who is so hardworking and kind and compassionate. And honestly, he tells the best stories. Like this one. So when he was 12 years old, and keep in mind, he grew up in Depression-era Oklahoma. When he was 12 years old, his mother told him that she was going to take him to the doctor to get his tonsils out. Fair enough. However, when he woke up, his throat wasn't sore because they had circumcised him instead. That or the doctor missed. But let me get to the point. Let me cut right to it. Thank you. Yeah, there was no way around that one. It's a biology lesson, too. Now you know how it works. He's a good man. And to be honest, I've always, since I was a little kid, looked up to him a whole bunch. I've often thought that if I could be half of the hard worker that he is, or half the father that he is to his two daughters, and if I can be that kind of father to my two daughters, then I would be extremely lucky. But even if I can't achieve that type of level, I know that I have one thing in common with him. I too wear a size 14 because, hold your applause, because shoe size runs in the family. Now, what does shoe size have to do with to be continued? Well, everything. Let me explain. So I know that we often think that we are like self-made people, that we pull ourselves up by our own bootstraps, that we have made everything that we have. We have achieved all of our success. But to be honest, if you stop and think about it, most of what you have has been given to you. I mean, you didn't pick where you were born. And you didn't pick what family you were born into. You didn't pick your genetics, and honestly, you didn't pick your generational sins either. In fact, and though you had to make a personal choice, in fact, you wouldn't be sitting where you are today had someone not passed on the faith to you. So when it comes to be continued, I think what we have to remember tonight is so much of what we have has been given to us. Really what we're responsible for is what we do with it. We spent the week, right, walking with Elijah as he pursues and walks with God. And we've spent so much time talking about Elijah that we can actually, if we're not careful, be confused. Because our story this week is not about Elijah. Because we know that his scene, his chapter in this story is going to end tonight, and the story is just getting started. We had the chance to be introduced last night to a new character in this story, Elisha. And our speakers did such a wonderful job last night and this morning telling this story about how Elisha meets Elijah, and Elijah says, "Follow me. Come learn from me. Come be the next great prophet." And Elisha does that. And Elijah says, "Okay, I'll follow you. I want to be the next great prophet. When?" And Elijah says, about that. Because even though it's just a few pages in our Bibles from 1 Kings 19, where Elijah meets Elisha, and 2 Kings chapter 2, where our story is tonight, there's just a few flips or a big scroll in between those two stories. We have to remember that there's approximately 18 years from the time that Elijah calls Elisha to the time that he actually hands over the reins. 18 years is a long time. That's a lot of waiting. And I would imagine, because I'm human and Elisha was too, that at some point during those 18 years, Elisha had to be extremely frustrated with God. Think about all the stuff he gave up to follow Elijah and ultimately follow God and be the guy. And he's spending what amounts to the prime of his life, the Bible says, being a servant to Elijah. And I'm sure there were nights that Elisha was just so frustrated and laid in bed wondering when God was going to finally do what he said that he was going to do. And I know God is all-powerful and almighty and does anything when he wants to, but I don't know about you, but I feel like I spend a lot of my life waiting on God. And here's what I've learned about waiting. It takes a while. So when I was a sophomore in high school, I took Spanish 1, fifth hour. Now, the Spanish class is kind of really irrelevant to the story. This isn't a story about how I learned Spanish. In fact, I still don't know Spanish. But what is relevant to the story is that Latin 4 met in the classroom right next door to Spanish 1. And in Latin 4 was a senior named Tori Lee. Now, I had met Tori the summer before, and when I found out that she was at the same high school that I was, although 2 years ahead of me, I spent the next year doing everything that I could to put myself right next to her in the same geographical space. Some people would call that stalking, and they are right. So Tori took Latin next to me, and I took Spanish. And as you can imagine, being a couple years difference in school, there provided some really interesting hurdles to what I would hope would become a relationship. After all, I was a sophomore taking lower-level classes. She was a senior taking upper-level classes. I was a 15-year-old child. She was an 18-year-old woman who could legally buy cigarettes and go off to war. But when God closes a door, you kick it down. And so I persisted. I was a little desperate. You see, up until that point, my dating profile had been, shall we say, scarce. There were only two instances. One, there was a girl at church camp. Okay, those are valid relationships, but keep in mind, my church camp was so small that the most eligible bachelor at church camp simply had to know all the motions to Lord, I lift your name on high. Lord, I lift your, you know. And the other girl, well, the best way I can describe her is that her family raised ferrets. Which sounds exotic, but I tell you, nothing kills the mood faster than getting ferret dander in your mouth. Where do you find these kids? So I did everything I could to spend time with Tori, who ultimately wasn't that interested in any kind of relationship with me. And so I tried desperately to put myself in the same situation that she was in, and it was difficult. However, there were 7 glorious minutes after the 5th period every day where I was guaranteed that if I positioned myself correctly to be in the same exact spot that she was in. Because the classes would all let out after 5th period, and based on how the rooms were set up, she would have to walk right by the Spanish classroom and then walk down the hallway. So every day, that entire year, as soon as the bell rang, I grabbed my books and went and stood in the hallway and waited for her to exit and then casually walk beside her. I would like to say that I was sly or clever, but the truth is I wasn't. The class would dismiss, and I'd just kind of go stand like a puppy at the pound. Like, please, ma'am, pick me or they're going to put me down. And then as she walked up to me, I would try to just kind of pick up the pace and walk back into the flow of traffic and strike up some kind of conversation. I say that I wasn't sly because, well, it was pretty obvious what I was doing to her and all of her senior classmates. So much so that one afternoon, I promise you, I saw one of her friends walking with her, and they saw me, and I could see her friend mouth, well, there's your little sophomore friend. And I thought, they know what grade I'm in. I've been seen. And every day, I would wait for Tori. And every day, I would walk from 5th period to 6th period with her. And every day that I waited was worth it. I don't know how long you've been waiting on God to do something in your life. I don't know how long you've waited on Him to change someone's heart in your family, or to open a door, or to answer a prayer. I don't know how long you will wait on God. But I know this: God never wastes an hour of waiting on Him. God never wastes any heartbreak or any long night. And the time that we spend waiting on Him as He unfolds this big story is always redeemed. And look, God is just as patient with you too. And you might not be where you want to be today. But I believe Philippians 1 that says when God starts a new work in us, He will carry it on to completion. And if you're not where you want to be today, that does not disqualify you from redemption or from future kingdom work. God is simply just asking you to wait. And we know, looking back, it's always easier looking back, that that's just what Elisha did. And eventually, his time came. And we pick up the story in 2 Kings chapter 2, and we see this. 50 men from the company of the prophets went and stood at a distance, facing the place where Elijah and Elisha had stopped at the Jordan. Elijah took his cloak, rolled it up, and struck the water with it. The water was divided to the right and to the left, and the two of them crossed over on dry ground. When they had crossed, Elijah said to Elisha, "Tell me what I can do for you before I am taken from you." "Let me inherit a double portion from your spirit," Elisha replied. "You've asked a difficult thing," Elijah said. "Yet if you see me when I am taken from you, it will be yours. Otherwise, it will be not." So I know Chris kind of laid out the historical context of this morning, but can I just call a timeout for a second? I've always read this and thought, well, who does Elisha think he is? Like, he's asking one of the most important prophets of all time to be twice as powerful as him. That's bold. In fact, that might even be a little crazy. And what if that's the point? What if God is actually sitting back waiting on us to ask for some bold prayers? A few years ago, when my daughter was in preschool, the preschool teacher had an assignment where one day in class they all got a piece of paper and they were all going to draw what they wanted to be when they grew up. Again, these are 4-year-olds, okay? They haven't taken the SAT yet. These are visions and dreams. And then the teacher kind of compiled them all and put them in a book, and every kid got to take one home, and I guess to give to the parents to stick away and actually hold the kids to it and going, hey, in 18 years, you better come through for this. It's written in crayon, right? It counts. And so I loved it. I got a chance to look at the book, and Alice brought it to me, and kind of looking through the book with her and everything else. And I'll be honest, most all of them were, as you can expect, very, very cute, but also very, very typical. If you look, I actually saved some of them. So here's just some stuff. So this is Jace. Jace wants to be a fireman with a Captain America shield, apparently. So that's pretty good. That's a very attainable career, right? So if we go to the next one, this is my daughter, Alice. At that time, wanted to be a lifeguard. And you can see she still has all of her arms and legs, I think, what those arrows mean, which is good. The next would be, let's see. Oh, this is Shay. She wants to be a teacher at a nudist colony, apparently. Raise pineapples. So that's good. That's a noble calling, right? This is Carson. He wants to be he wants to be Iron Man. The next one. This is Brooke. I don't know what she's doing to that dog, but she wants to be a veterinarian. Big dreams these kids had. But then, I got to the very end of the book, and I have a feeling that the teacher tucked this away on purpose. Because most of the parents would have given up at that point. But at the very end of the book, and hold it for just a second, but at the very end of the book, I got to Dashiell's page. And first of all, Dashiell's not a real name. It's what Santa calls one of his reindeers when he's had too much eggnog. I'm Dashiell. But when I got to Dashiell's page, Dashiell said that he wanted to be. Dashiell said he wanted to be. I don't know what a tree rex is. I'm assuming it's the king of the trees, which if you're going to be a tree, you might as well be the king of the trees. But then I told Alice, you cannot talk to Dashiell anymore. But what if Dashiell is right? Meaning this. I think so often we strive so hard to fit into other people's boxes and expectations and limits for what we can do and what God can do from us. And I think God sometimes sits on the edge of heaven just waiting for you to dream of something so crazy. And he thinks, that's great, you can be a veterinarian. But what if you were a tree rex? Because if you can be a tree rex, don't settle for being a veterinarian. And you can quote me on that. I think God has such big visions and big plans for your life. He wants you to do such amazing things that He has specifically gifted each of you for. He just needs you to stretch your imagination big enough to hold what He thinks is possible. Does that make sense? And so when Elisha says, I want a double portion, why wouldn't God give him that? Because God's story has always been about expanding and growing and getting bigger and bigger. God has a vested interest in the kingdom work He is calling you to do. And get this, if He's calling you to do it, you will not fail. You know why? Because I've read the end of the book. We win. So why would you not dream some crazy, stupid, big dream? And people will say, there's no such thing as a tree rex. And you say, that's because you haven't seen one yet. Tree rex. And I think that's what Elijah and Elisha were talking about. And then it got crazy. The story continues. As they were walking along and talking together, suddenly a chariot of fire, hold up, and horses of fire, appeared and separated the two of them. And Elijah went up into heaven in a whirlwind. Elisha saw this and cried out, you think, my father, the chariots and horsemen of Israel. And then Elisha saw him no more. Then he took hold of his garment and tore it in two. I got to believe that this thing happened so quickly that Elisha struggled to even take out his phone and put it on his Instagram story. Hashtag sweet chariot, hashtag he gone. And isn't that funny how moments like that are? These big moments that happen in our life, they're really quick. Think about how quick this week has gone. Really, really fast. And the funny thing about tornadoes is that they're really loud for a moment and then strangely quiet in the aftermath. I know this because in May 2011, a tornado destroyed my house. I live in Joplin, Missouri, and we were hit by a tornado that spring, and I was actually working on the other side of town. My wife, Tori, that's right, I waited long enough and married her. Thank you. 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 You're welcome. Thank you. But here's how relationships work. A little side note. A lot happened in between there, but you get the idea. But my wife Tori and our 4-week-old daughter Alice were at the house by themselves. Now, we grew up in Oklahoma, so this was kind of normal. We kind of got used to this. We understood how the drill works. That bluebird sky afternoons, beautiful May afternoons, the skies can turn gray and deadly in an instant. And that Sunday afternoon, they did. And so my wife was at home alone, and we're texting back and forth as I'm working across town, and she goes down into the basement with holding our little girl Alice, and she sends me a text. And she texts this. As the sirens were going off, I tell her to grab the radio and the laptop. She says, already downstairs, not enough hands. How long are we under the warning? 6 or so. And a little bit of time goes by, and she forgets how to spell. Because an F5 tornado was currently churning up our side of town. And the way she tells the story is, it was really, really loud. I waited as long as I could, and then I rushed home. And I got a couple blocks away from my house, and I didn't know where I was anymore. All the landmarks and trees and most of the houses were gone. But I'll never forget the moment that I was walking along the sidewalk, and my wife and daughter and our dog came walking down the sidewalk. They were fine, but our house was gone. Yeah. I'll never forget the next morning standing in what used to be my yard, not really knowing what to do next. Who do I call? What do we try to save? How do I begin to kind of clean all of this up? I mean, we were very fortunate. 164 people died in that storm, and we were very, very lucky, but we also did not know what to do next. And I'll never forget, I had a friend who said, okay, as he stood in the lawn with me, and he said, let's just do the next thing. I don't know what the week has been like for you. I know that a lot of times we get things out of experiences like this that we don't expect. And maybe God has made a holy mess of your life this week in the best of ways. Maybe he has rearranged your priorities and your expectations. Maybe he's rearranged what you want to do next year in the same way that tornado rearranged my yard. And you're about to get on a van, and you're about to go home and try to live to be continued, but you don't really know where to turn. Can I encourage you with this? Just do the next thing. Just do the next thing. You don't have to have it all figured out today. God just needs you to take the next step. And we're promised that if we do, he will walk with us. And there's a lot of talk, especially around nights like this and then a couple of weeks from now, about the CIY high. And you might be tempted to say in a couple of weeks or couple of months, you'll be sitting in your small group and you'll go, oh, I just don't feel like I didn't move. And guess what? You're not supposed to. Because you have so much Red Bull in your system. You are so sleep deprived. You've eaten Pringles for breakfast for the last 3 days. Your chemical structure inside of you is so out of whack that we call it the CIY high because you are literally high right now. Got it. You're not supposed to feel this way forever. But God is just as real. The spirit that Elisha asked for is just as present when you go back home than he is in this room right now. Currently, you're just in a moment and it's really, really loud. But just because you can't hear God doesn't mean that he's not working. And I think Elisha got this. Because all of a sudden, after the storm rolled through and Elijah was taken up into heaven, the Bible says this. Elisha then picked up Elijah's cloak, the same cloak that was wrapped around him perhaps all those years ago, that had fallen from him, and went back and stood on the bank of the Jordan. He took the cloak that had fallen from Elijah and struck the water with it. Where now is the Lord, the God of Elijah? He asked. And when he struck the water, it divided to the right and to the left, and he crossed over. The funny thing about to be continued moments is they really are all about what happens next. And though it might not feel like it in the moment, I can tell you that life moves pretty quick. Any graduated seniors in here? You graduated senior? It went quick, didn't it? What's your name? What is it again? Sean? Johnny? Shawnee? Johnny? You've just graduated? Yeah. Johnny, stand up for me. So, you ready? Okay. Yeah, great. Yeah, you throw it back. Perfect. Thank you. It's a tight spiral. Very nice. So, Johnny, I'm been around youth ministry circles for long enough. Keep it up, please. There we go. I've been around youth ministry circles long enough that people, for some reason, they lose their mind in the month of May, right? And you'll talk to your parents, or you'll talk to some of your youth sponsors, or some of the people in your church, and you'll say, "Hey, I'm graduating," and they'll go, "What? That can't be true!" And you're like, well, yeah, I matriculated through the classes, and I got enough credits, and I've been in the youth ministry for 4 years, and it's just kind of how time works, like it moves forward. And they just lose their mind because they don't realize that well, Johnny, you're growing up. And here's what we do. It might even happen tonight, I don't know. But you'll get together in your youth group time, and man, people are going to cry, right? And they're going to miss Johnny, and they don't know how they're going to go on without Johnny, and the youth group's never going to be the same because Johnny's such a big leader, and all this kind of stuff, and how, I don't know you, I'm just kind of casting all these things on you. How are we ever going to move forward without Johnny, and all these types of things. But you know what also happens every May, every fall? Every time a class of graduated seniors leaves, you know what happens? Hold that for me. So, like any incoming freshmen over here? Right here. Let's stand up. What is your name? What is it again? One more time. You're Matthew, and you are an incoming freshman. Okay. I don't want to stereotype, but that's not how I saw that going. So, I would be really bad at that carnival game. Guess how old this kid is. So you're an incoming freshman. So here's the deal. What needs to happen now, as a class of graduated seniors leave, for this to be continued moment to actually make sense, is this. Yeah, you can sit down. And we struggle with this, right? We think this is such a bad thing, but the truth is, this is kind of the way it works. And not just in youth group, but in all of life, really. Really, since that day on the bank of the Jordan River. Because Elijah passes to Elisha, and then Jesus gets 12 followers around him and a few hundred around them, and, well, at the end of the Gospels, he passes it on to them. And instead of just giving a double portion of the Spirit, he gives them the Spirit. Are you kidding me? And Paul passes to Timothy, and my grandfather passes to me. And I know I said that most of what we have has been given to us, and it's kind of true. But you also better believe that we are extremely responsible for what we do with it when we get it. So now is your time to be continued. And what does shoe size have to do with that? Well, everything. You see, last October, it was a Sunday morning at 7:45, and my mom called me. And we're a texting family, aren't we all? And I knew the moment that she called me that something wasn't right. So much so that I answered the phone, "What's wrong?" And my mom on the other end of the line was fighting back tears. And she said, Granddad had an aneurysm burst, and they're taking him to the hospital, and he's not going to make it. And I wasn't ready for that phone call. And I guess you never really are. But I skipped church that morning, and I drove the 2 hours down to the little hospital where they lived, and we sat next to his bedside as the nurses made him comfortable. And that afternoon, his scene ended, but also just began. People would ask me, well, was it sudden? And I would go, well, he was 90 years old. He'd been dying for 90 years. But the truth is, I take a lot of hope in just the way that he would talk about it. This was a man who understood what lay on the other side of such a normal, natural part of life. And he would kind of jokingly say with a twinkle in his eye, no one's getting out of this world alive. And he was ready, even if it was sudden. And here's the funny thing about eternal life. I guess you could say it is the ultimate to be continued, but eternal life is not something that we get someday when we die, but no, we're practicing for eternity every day that we walk around on this earth. And he lived his life like that. He understood that he was being grafted into a bigger story, that he was a part of something so much bigger than me and him who share the same shoe size. He was something that stretches all the way back to the Jordan River that fateful afternoon. His chapter, at least here, was just ending. So a few weeks ago, we were back at my grandmother's house. It still feels weird to say that. And she had said to me, hey, Eric, you need to go into his closet. And I said, okay. And she kind of rolled her eyes and she said, you're the only one that can wear those shoes. I said, okay. And so I did. I went back into their bedroom and I opened the closet, which was shut and probably had been for months, and I stood in my grandfather's closet. And there were a row of shoes on the wall. And I picked a pair off of the wall. And in that moment, I was overwhelmed, not with the fear of death, but with the sense that I still had time and that I was still here and that my story's not over yet. And so I, right there in his closet, sat down on the floor. Have you ever untied your shoes in front of an audience? It's very difficult. And I don't know what life is going to hold for me, but if I can walk through life with the same awareness of how big this story is, and if I can walk through life with the same peace that God never fails, and He may take His time, but He never gives up on us. And at the end of it all, the ultimate to be continue is that it goes on and on and on forever. Because the only thing that ends is my sin. Because when Jesus said, "It is finished," I believed Him. And yeah, they might be a little big, but we've all got big shoes to fill.